Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on CELPIP Live. Here's your trivia question for the day. Which Canadian city hosted the 2010 Winter Olympic Games? It's an easy one. Which Canadian city hosted the 2010 Winter Olympic Games? Let me know the answer in the comments below. You can also share this image and your answer on Instagram with the hashtag CELPIP Live, and we may feature it on our feed. I will, of course, reveal the response at the end of our segment. For now, let's start our show. If you're new here, CELPIP Live is an interactive series made to help CELPIP test takers understand more about the CELPIP test. So if you're about to write the test, please subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as we go live. In today's episode, we're discussing task 2 of the reading section. Randy is back and ready to practice with you, so let's go say hello to her. Hi, Randy. How's it going?
Hi, I'm very well, Ashwati. Thank you so much. How are you today?
I'm doing well. The weather is much better today, so I'm looking forward to the day.
Yeah, it's comfortable. And I love your question, your trivia question for today's episode. I know the answer, and I'll tell our viewers, I lived in that city while the Olympics were going on, and it was the most exciting time of my life. I see some guesses coming in the chat. Lots of people are guessing Canadian cities. You're in the right country, but nobody's got the right answer yet, so keep those guesses coming in.
Excited to find out what the answer is, and I'm also looking forward to hear your experience living in the city. But yes, I'm going to let you get started.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to share my screen, so here we go. Okay, so today we are going to do some more reading practice. We're focusing specifically on reading part 2, which is going to ask you to work with a diagram. So it's a very different skill set. So before we look at our practice question today, I just wanted to show what the entire reading test looks like from start to finish. It takes about 1 hour to complete, and there will be 4 different parts to finish. The very first part of this test is literally a 1-minute practice question. It's just to test out your equipment and make sure that you know how to navigate on the screen using your mouse and your computer. But then you'll get right into the test, and you'll start with part 1, work your way down to the end there. So we're going to look specifically at part 2 today, which again is called reading to apply a diagram. You'll always have a specific number of questions per part. So in part 2, you'll have around 8 questions to finish, and there will be a slightly different amount of time for each part as well. So in part 2, you're given roughly 9 minutes or so of time. So there are 3 specific types of questions that we really need to prepare for as we get into today's episode, so you'll do well on your test. At any time during the reading test, you might be asked general meaning questions, and these types of questions are going to focus your attention on the big picture, very broad ideas. So a classic general meaning type question is always going to be, what is the topic of this passage? So you would have to find the answer using sometimes the entire reading passage or sometimes large sections of it. But the second type here, those specific information questions, those are just the opposite. They're going to focus your attention in a very narrow capacity. You might be looking for one word in the entire reading passage that will lead you to the correct answer. Or it could be a half of a sentence, maybe one sentence at most. So these specific information questions are, again, very narrow in scope. They tend to be a little bit easier because they're looking for usually just one word or 2 within the text. Those inference questions, though, on the other hand, tend to be among the more challenging types of questions because your answer choices are not going to be stated directly in the text. Instead, what we need to do there is put together all the information that we've learned about through reading and then choose the best answer from the list of choices on the test itself. So it's like playing detective a little bit and putting together the clues to come up with a conclusion. You're making an assumption that's logical based on the information that you've encountered. So we will answer these different types of questions in today's episode, so you'll have some more practice with that. So a couple more things to note before we look at the question today. When you begin this test, you'll notice that reading part 1 should feel the easiest to you. As that test progresses and you get into part 3 and then part 4, you'll notice that the types of questions you're being asked, so sometimes the vocabulary, the grammar and sentence structure, and even the ideas themselves, they're going to start to become more complex as that test progresses. So again, reading part 4 is going to feel much more challenging to you than reading part 1 did when you started. So that's normal. The test is designed that way, and that's what identifies the beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced level readers. So don't be thrown by that. The test is designed that way specifically. All right, so because the test does increase in complexity as it goes forward, you'll find probably more inference type and more general meaning type questions in the later parts of the test. Remember, those specific detailed questions, they tend to be a little bit easier. So you'll probably encounter more of them in the beginning parts of the test itself. Now, I guess we should talk about scoring before we practice our questions today. So you're looking here at a chart that shows you how the different levels of reading in CELPIP correspond to an exact score. So there is a total of 38 questions altogether that will be scored on the test. You get 1 point per correct answer. So again, the highest score you might achieve is 38 out of 38. And if you're lucky enough and strong enough in your skills to do that, you'd be achieving a level 12 for sure. Now, the computer is what's scoring this test, by the way. So it's programmed to recognize your answers as either right or wrong, and it's going to give you the score accordingly. But the good news is, if you guess incorrectly, if you answer a question wrong, you're not going to lose points. All right, you won't gain any points, but you would never be penalized. You're not going to lose marks for guessing incorrectly. So as a result, then, a good test strategy says, don't leave any question blank. You know, if you really don't know the answer, or if time is almost up and you're not quite finished, please just take a wild guess. You'll have 4 answer choices on the screen. You've got a 25% chance of guessing correctly. So in the last case scenario, that would be your best strategy at that point, is to guess. And if you're lucky, you'll guess correctly and you'll get the point for that question. Now, one thing I'm hoping you have noticed as I've been chattering away here is when you look at your reading scores in that chart, you should notice an overlap. So if you look at level 10 at the very top, that says that you need 33 out of 38 to score a level 10. But if you look right below that at the level 9, you'll see as well that the score 33 is included there. So I'm hoping you're asking yourself, if I score 33 out of 38, does that mean I get a level 9 or a level 10 on my reading? And the answer to that question has to do with what we call score equating. This has to do with the complexity of the questions on the test. So remember, when you go into the testing center to take your CELPIP test, you'll be sitting in the same room with several other test takers, just like yourselves. Not everybody in that room is completing the exact same test. You don't all have the same questions and answers. And that's designed, of course, to protect the privacy and the security of those tests. So even though all of the tests are designed according to the same high standards, sometimes there might be 1 or 2 questions that are just slightly different in the level of complexity. So for example, if you and I were both sitting in the same testing center, but we had different test questions, let's pretend for a moment that my test question was just a little bit more difficult than yours was. If you and I both scored 33 out of 38, because I had the slightly more complex question, my 33 score is going to earn me a level 10. But your test, because it had a slightly easier question, your 33 score then would match up with the level 9. So that's how that works. If you want more information about this, you'll find it up on our website. Again, it's called Score Equating, but that explains where the scores are coming from. All right, let's get right into our practice today. So the first things first is I wanted to show you what a diagram looks like. All right, you'll notice there are usually about 4 parts to the diagram, and there are 2 sets of questions. So the diagram's always on the left, and the questions you're answering will always be on the right-hand side. When you answer these questions, most of the questions will be sentence completion. So you see here, question 1, this is a general meaning question. It says, the article is mainly about. You would click on that little drop-down arrow, and the computer will open up the 4 answer choices. So your job now is to read through the list and click on the answer choice that you feel best completes that sentence. And as soon as you click, the computer will automatically insert that phrase or that word right into the blank. So that entire sentence now, number 1, from start to finish, hopefully is correct if you've answered the question correctly. You'll notice that the print as well is green. It's just a visual clue to you that you've answered that question and you haven't left anything blank. Now, if you want to change your answer on the test, you can certainly do that. You would just click on the answer that you've already inserted into the blank. The computer will open up those 4 answer boxes or the 4 choices again. Just click on the new choice that you think is correct. So you can change your ideas, I guess, as many times as you need to, but you have to be happy with your answers before the timer reaches 0. Once that clock gets to 0, whatever you've got submitted in these blanks, that's what's going off to the computer to be scored. So just be mindful of your time, please. All right, here's the question that we're going to deal with today. So I can't fit the entire diagram onto one screen vertically as it's meant to be. So all I've done is I've chunked out the top half of this diagram on the left of our screen. The bottom half, as you can see, is on the right. So there are 4 different pieces of information here. So before we even look at the questions on the test, I'm going to present a strategy that I really hope you use if you've got a test upcoming. I would encourage you to please take 10 or even 15 seconds to preview the page. Take a good look to see how that diagram is set up and figure out exactly what it is you're looking at. If you can do that now, when you get into the questions and answer choices, it'll save you time because you'll have an idea of where to look in the diagram. All right, so again, we've just got the top half of the diagram for now on our screen. And if you look at it, hopefully very quickly, as you look at those pictures and then the types of details you see listed, I'm hoping you're recognizing that this is some sort of a travel brochure. So we're learning all about travel packages, which is a fun topic of conversation in the summertime as we are in now. All right, so because it's a travel brochure, I would encourage you to just have a quick look to see what other details you notice. So right off the top, you'll notice that there are the travel routes included. So you can see where we're starting and what country or city we'll be flying to, I guess. We also notice the cost is listed there too. And the cost is in blue font. So that makes it easier for our eyes to pick that out. I also noticed the dates right at the very bottom there. So you can see easily when exactly you'll be booking this package. And you'll notice that where these details are found are the same in every single part of that diagram. So again, knowing where to look is going to save you time. You might have a question later on that asks you about the cost of one of these packages. So now you'll know exactly where to look, as I say, to be quicker at this. I think sometimes too, it's just nice to have a quick look at some other details before you look at your questions. So I noticed there's a star rating here, and the star rating of any hotel tells us how basic or how fancy that hotel is. So that's a nice detail to notice. And as we skim read over the details on the screen, it just tells us what's included in the package. So I can pull out some important words here about the food, about the airfare, and things like that. So I don't have to commit these to memory. I just have to understand what type of information I'm looking at. So all said and done, these parts of the screen that we just had a look at, again, I would say up to 15 seconds maximum on your test. It should be very quick. That's about as fast as you would need, I think, in order to get familiar with what you're looking at. So here we have, again, your diagrams on the left. I know it's small right now. Don't worry about that. I'll make it bigger in just a minute. But what I wanted to draw your attention to right now is the email that you see here on the right-hand side. So the top part, or that first set of questions you're answering for part 2, is always going to be an email, exactly as you see. You see there are 5 questions as well to answer using that drop-down format that we've already discussed. Now, once again, before we just start reading through that email and answering questions as we are able, I would encourage you to take another 10 seconds of your time and get familiar with what is going on in this email. The very first thing I would look at is who's the writer. And we know in an email structure that the writer's name should go at the very bottom. That's where you sign your name. So this writer's name is Marion. So again, we're just going to put that up in our memory banks. We'll probably have a question about Marion later on. So now we know who that is. That's the writer. We should probably know who the reader is as well. And you'll find the reader's name right up here. His name is Sam. And you also see the greeting. The email is addressed to Sam. Hi, Sam, it says. Okay, so those parts are easy. I think the purpose statement is worth noticing. So if you would quickly skim read over that very first sentence of this email, you're going to notice that the entire email is talking about those 4 travel packages that we see in the diagram to the left. And then if we skip our eyes down to the bottom of the page, we want to see if there's a next step. Is Marion requesting something of Sam? That's what we want to know now before we start reading through the details of this email. And at the very bottom, I see that Marion is actually asking Sam for his ideas or input, probably about these travel packages. So it sounds like they're planning this trip together. So that's the impression we have as we do a very quick preview of this email. Okay, so to recap, first we got familiar with the diagram. That took about 10 to 15 seconds. And then we quickly previewed this email. So we're now familiar with the important pieces. Again, that takes about 10 seconds. So now that we're ready, we're going to start answering the questions. So that very first question, I'm just going to pop open the 4 answer choices for us all so we can see them. And I'll just read out loud, I guess, from that first sentence so we have a background and know what it is we're supposed to find. So this one says, "Hi, Sam. I've dug up 4 travel packages that would earn us 10 times the regular Jet Miles points. Surprisingly, the cheapest package also features," and then we've got these 4 ideas to draw from. Now, I know it's tempting to start looking at those answer choices. I'm not ready to look at them yet because what I'd like to do as an effective reader is I'd like to figure out which part of that diagram I even need to look at. I might as well figure that out first. Once I've located it, I can start looking for these answer choices in the right place. So when I go back to those sentences that I just read out loud, the important words, the key words, are right here. So this first answer has something to do with the cheapest package. So we need to identify, of these 4 travel packages in the diagram, which one is the cheapest. That's what we need to do first before we can start looking for those answer choices within that part of the diagram. We already know where the prices are because we previewed this diagram earlier. Remember, the prices are in blueprint. So if you have a quick look back at that diagram, you're just looking for the cheapest option. So we look 1, 2, 3, 4 prices. Well, this one's the cheapest. So again, as an effective reader, I'm only interested in looking at this Montreal to Cancun trip. I'd be wasting my time if I looked at any other part of this diagram. So try to narrow down your focus. Make sure you know what part of the diagram will give you the answer. So now that we've got it, we then have to return to the answer choices and just go one by one to see which one of these is true of this Montreal to Cancun trip. So answer choice A there talks about accommodation. So as I turn my attention to the diagram, I find the word accommodation immediately. This is called scanning. So I'm not really reading the words in the diagram. I'm literally looking for that one word, accommodation, so I can do a direct match. So now that I've found it in the diagram, I need to figure out, is this accommodation for this Montreal to Cancun trip, is it simple? That's what answer A is asking me to consider. So when I look back at the diagram, I see this is a 5-star resort and it's being described as deluxe. That's the opposite of simple. So answer choice A just isn't true for this package. We can immediately eliminate this from consideration. So we move on to answer choice B, and this one is all about food and drinks. So again, I go back to my diagram, do a quick scan. You're just looking for the words food and drinks, or you might find words that mean the same as food and drinks. And sure enough, it's a direct match. So this is so far so good. It's pretty easy so far. We've not had any surprises. Now, when I read the diagram, all it tells me is that the package includes food and drinks. The answer choice B says unlimited food and drinks. I think this is probably the answer. The information in that diagram leads me to believe that I'm not going to have to buy any of my food or drinks. So that's the same as saying it's unlimited. So I suspect that's the answer. But just before I click it, I'm going to do a very quick double check of those other 2 answers. I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding anything. So that answer choice C talks about the most nights away. Now we know that the travel dates are at the bottom of each part of the diagram. We've already figured that out in the opening. So again, we're looking at our Montreal trip. That's where we start. So this Montreal trip looks like it's only 1 week long. So we need to figure out, does this have the most number of dates? So we can look at any other dates on the diagram. Let's just go next door, it's easy. Well, this trip here to Australia is 2 weeks. So right away, I've proven answer C to be false. Clearly, Mexico, that trip, it does not have the most nights away. I don't even have to look at the other 2 parts of that diagram. I've already proven this false. So answer C, incorrect. And then we go on to the last one. This one talks about having a guided tour. And I guess if we look at that little paragraph there on the diagram, let's see if it says anything about a tour. I don't see anything about a tour, so therefore, doesn't seem to be true. So our initial instinct there of that answer choice B, it's the only one left. It's correct. It has to be correct. We've proven the other ones to be false. So we're going to click on answer choice B with our mouse. And as soon as we do that, the computer will magically insert it into that blank for us. And again, it turns green just to show you that you've answered that blank and you're ready to move on. So that little strategy we did there, we thought we had the right answer fairly quickly, but we took a moment to just double check those other choices. On a test, if you've got a question that you're really not sure about, I think the best strategy you might use is if you could prove the other answers to be false and you're only left with that one choice left, then that's got to be the correct answer. So it's a pretty good strategy there to use if you need the confidence to know that that one answer is correct. Sometimes too, it's a good strategy if you've got extra time at the end of your reading part. If you finished all the questions, there's extra time on the clock. I might go back and look at some of the more difficult questions and use that strategy just to make sure, again, I've answered correctly. Anyway, let's move on. So we've answered question 1. Let's just do one more from this section to make sure we've all got the hang of this. So we'll look at question 2 next. So I'm just going to read out loud from where we've ended in green print there. So the second sentence there says, however, it's hard to get a sense of value for the money because even though all the trips include all taxes and fees, as well as blank, there's a lot of variety in terms of what's included in the price. So again, before we even read those answer choices, let's determine what part of the diagram we're going to be looking at in order to find these ideas. So returning to that sentence that we just read together, Marion says, because even though all the trips include all taxes and fees, as well as one of these answer choices. So what that means then is that we will find one of these 4 answer choices. It has to be true for every single trip mentioned. So for this question, we're going to have to look at all 4 parts of the diagram. So there are all 4 parts. You can see the answer choices above there in orange, just to keep us on track. So I guess really, we're just going to go through them one at a time. Again, our goal is to find the idea that is true for every single answer. Okay, so I'm going to use my little laser pointer here to go through this part quickly. So we'll start over here, and we're looking for evidence of breakfast every day included in the package. And as we quickly scan this part of the text, I see the word breakfast. So this one works. If we can find breakfast in the other 3, answer A is correct. So this one works. Coming over here, immediately I see breakfast is included. Coming down here now, this is the one where food is included. So breakfast is food. So this one works out okay. So far, so good. If we can find it over here, it's the right answer. Nope. We were so close, but breakfast isn't here. What I see is that this package gives you access to restaurants. That tells us we have to buy our own food. So breakfast is not included there. So because answer choice A isn't true for all 4 of these, it's not the answer we're looking for. Close, but not quite. So let's go on to answer choice B. So now we're at basic accommodation. So starting back here at the beginning, right away, I see this is a 4-star hotel, and it's being described as luxury. So this answer choice B is not true of at least this part of the diagram, so I can already cross it off my list. Remember, it has to be true for all 4 parts. So answer B is false. Let's see if we can find anything about travel insurance here. So let's start back here. As we scan through, I don't see any mention of the words travel insurance anywhere. And I also do not see any words that mean the same as travel insurance. So because I can't find that detail in the diagram, it simply can't be true. Now, we're left with one answer, two-way travel. So hopefully that's the correct answer because nothing else seems to be working. But I don't know about you, but me, I like to be very thorough on a test. So I'm going to double check anyway that two-way travel is mentioned in all four of these, just to make absolutely certain I've not misread something earlier. So when I go back here, round trip airfare. So round trip means you're going to your destination and coming home. That's the same as two-way travel. So this checks out. Round trip travel, yes, round trip travel. So we were pretty sure we had the right answer, but we've just made absolutely certain that that answer choice D is correct. So we can now confidently select it on the test. The computer inserts it and on you go to finish the rest. Now we're not going to take the time today to finish these other three questions and answers. You would do them in the same fashion as we've been working through. But what I will do right now quickly, I'm just going to insert the rest of the answers because we're going to move on to that second set of questions for part 2. And you'll need reference to this completed email in order to answer the questions that are coming next. So again, now we've got this completed email. Let's turn our attention to question set 2. This is the bottom section of questions on the computer screen. So we're only going to do one of these today. We simply don't have time to do all three. So let's just do this one. You'll notice the numbers finish off where you left off. So you had 5 answers in the top part. You've got 3 answers here, but they're labeled as 6, 7, and 8. So there are 8 questions altogether for this part of the test. So let's read through our question. This one says, Sam is probably Marion's blank. So we open up the answer choices and we can see that we're trying to figure out how these two people are related. Now remember, we previewed that email earlier, so we know that Sam is the reader and Marion is the writer. So that's helpful, I think, just to get us started. The next thing that I'll draw your attention to here is this signal word in the actual question. When you see words like probably, possibly, maybe, likely, and so on, these are inference questions. They're clues to you, the reader, that these 4 answer choices that you're looking at, they're not going to be stated directly in the text. So what we have to do then, as I say, is play detective. So you've got the 4 answer choices there at the bottom in orange, again, just to keep them up front so we can see them. We have to return to this email that we've already finished completing. We have to skim read it and look for evidence, look for clues that will help us determine how Sam and Marion are related. And I think the quickest and easiest way to get started is to briefly look at the greeting and the sign-off. So you notice the greeting says, "Hi, Sam." That's very casual. The sign-off says, "Love, Marion." Well, that's very intimate. That's indicative of a very close relationship. So when we look back at those 4 answers, let's hope it's not the boss. Probably Marion and Sam are family members based on the way that Marion is greeting and signing off here in the email. So now we have to read through the email itself to determine if Marion and Sam are brother and sister, if Sam is her husband, or if Sam is her son. So you might already have an instinct right now. You might already have a guess, but let's just double check we're looking at the right evidence in the email. So as I start skim reading right from the top, I'm on the very first sentence there up top, I'm noticing this detail. So Marion is talking about how, I guess, she and Sam earn jet miles points together. So it sounds to me like they travel very frequently together and they have a shared account. That's probably not her son. I would assume this is another adult. Sounds like it could be her husband. Might be her brother though, I don't know. Let's just keep reading just to make sure. Okay, so we keep skim reading. She's talking on a little bit about two-way travel and what's included. The next detail for me that stands out is here. She says to Sam, soon we'll be away from Toronto at that French conference in Montreal. So clearly, both she and Sam live in Toronto. They live in the same city, and they're going to be traveling to a work conference in another city. Again, I think it's her husband. I don't think it's her son. I don't think she'd be traveling with her son to go to a work conference and collect air miles points with her son. That doesn't just seem to make a lot of sense to me. It's not the best choice anyway. So let's just make a decision, eliminate the word son from consideration. I'm still leaning towards husband here. I think it's more logical that she'd be traveling with her husband all these times than her brother. But let's just keep reading just to make sure. So as we keep skim reading, I see a detail about that Hawaiian package. And Marion says to Sam that it would be a really good option for the kids. So as soon as she starts talking about kids, I'm going to say that husband definitely is the best choice. It makes more sense, right? That she talk about the shared experiences and the children with her husband than it would with her brother. So again, we're going with the best choice based on what the clues have led up to. And we're going to insert husband into the blank. So that's an example of an inference type question, where again, you're pulling out details from different parts of the original passage in order to push you in the direction to select the best possible answer. And again, you would finish the other two choices this way as well. We won't take the time to do that today, but hopefully you've got some strategies now that will help you keep practicing at home on your own. So let's wrap up, I guess, what we did here today. So when you're addressing this diagram in part 2, the very first thing I would encourage you to do is get familiar with that diagram. Figure out what it is. You know, this one was a travel brochure. You might be reading an instructional guide. It might be an advertisement for a store. So figure out immediately what it is you're looking at, and then understand how it's set up. So you'll notice the pattern. You know, we saw immediately that the locations were at the top, then the prices, then there was a small write-up of details, and then the dates at the bottom. So you'll see those patterns, and then you'll know exactly where to look in the diagram when you want to start answering those questions. That previewing of the diagram, again, takes 10 to 15 seconds maximum. You don't want to spend a lot of time there. You want to get right over to the email. So again, take another 10 seconds. That's all it takes. Quickly look down at the bottom of that email, figure out who the writer is, look to the top, see who's reading, and then quickly skim read the opening and closing. You want to know what the purpose for this email is, and then if there is a next step or a request. So that stage takes about 10 seconds. So you'll still have about 8.5 minutes left here to answer 8 questions. So it's a very good time management plan, I would say. So once you're familiar, you know what you're doing. This is where you start pulling out those important words or those keywords right from the email itself in that top set of questions. And then you're going to start scanning the diagram to find those exact words, or sometimes words that mean the same as. You want to know exactly what part of the diagram to look at and start matching up those words. So you're going to select then the best answer from the answer choice list. Be careful of paraphrased ideas. I know a lot of the questions we did at the beginning of this episode were direct matches. So we saw words like accommodation in the email question and answers, and then in the text. But we also came across a paraphrase, remember? We saw round trip transportation and two-way travel. So we understood that those two phrases mean the exact same thing. So sometimes you'll have paraphrased ideas. Remember, as the reading test progresses, it gets harder. So in parts 3 and 4, you can expect to have more paraphrased ideas and fewer direct matches. So keep that in mind. We need to practice both methods. Okay, and once that email up top is finished, it's about 5 questions or so, you'll move on to that second set of questions right below at the bottom. You're going to refer now to the email you've completed with all the answers inserted and the diagram. And that's where you're pulling information from in order to answer those remaining questions. Okay, and again, you've got 9 minutes, I think we said, for this part of the test. So please make sure that you have answered every single question. Keep an eye on that time. If you've only got 10 seconds left and you're on your very last question, you might not have time to read it thoroughly. So take a wild guess and answer something. Please make sure every single blank is full. And that way, again, you might just guess correctly, be lucky, and get the point for that question. All right, you're never going to lose marks for guessing incorrectly. So it's better to guess than to leave it blank at all times. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to return to you. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. So I'll toss it out maybe to Ashwati to see if we've got any questions today.
I don't think we have questions yet. I'm gonna wait for a couple of minutes to see if anybody has questions. But that was a good episode. I actually enjoyed learning.
Sometimes working with diagrams, it's a completely different skill set. I myself, I'm not a visual learner that way. I have a hard time. I would rather read paragraphs and pull information out. So some of us have different learning styles. So some of us love diagrams and bulleted points and we work well with that, and others need more practice. So I'm hoping the strategies that I've shared with you today will give you some ideas if you're like me and you just need a little bit more work to get going with these diagrams, get those answers down. But yeah, they're sort of fun once you get the hang of it. I think they just require a little bit of practice. Okay, I'm looking back at the comments too. I know I can't see your comments when I'm presenting, but I'm looking at some of your answers here as you were going. And a lot of you were getting the correct answers too, following along. So that's really nice to see too.
We have a question though. I'm pretty sure you saw it as well. I'm going to share it here. I think they're looking to understand the relationship between writer and reader based on the signatures.
Okay, you can't just base the assessment on the signature. So this was a good starting point. As soon as we see the sign off that says love, Marion, we know it's a very close relationship. Most of the time when we use that word love, it's for our husband or wife, our partner, or perhaps a family member, sometimes for a close friend as well. But again, that word love on its own is not going to be enough to show you specifically which relative it's going to be. That's why we had to go back to the email and start pulling out those important pieces to really narrow it down. So we knew right away it's not the boss. We probably wouldn't be and shouldn't be addressing our boss as love, so-and-so. That would be inappropriate. So that was an easy one to eliminate. But like I say, the other three choices, they were all family members. So really any one of those remaining choices, brother, husband, son, might have made sense with the word love. But once we looked at the other evidence, we quickly ruled out son and left between brother and husband. Husband just seemed to make the most sense, talking about traveling together and kids. So that's how that worked. Yeah.
I also am wondering, and I guess this is also what Marcus is sort of looking for. Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong. What kind of signature can one expect if they're talking to a boss or somebody formal versus a friend versus a loved one?
Yeah, so I see Marcus has given an example here, the word best. And you know what, Marcus, I use that one often in business communication. So if I'm writing something that needs a formal tone to a colleague and it's not somebody I work with every day, that's my go-to. I say best, comma, Brandy. That's a very formal way to do it. So again, if you're writing to somebody you know really well, it could be somebody you work with every single day. If I was emailing Ashwati, I wouldn't say best, Brandy, because we talk often. So that to me seems too formal for that situation. So again, it's the formality of the tone as well. Best and sincerely and regards. These are nice formal ones for people that either are in a position of authority, like a manager, or somebody that you don't know incredibly well and you're being respectful in a business situation. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for those two little words, hey? You can really see the difference between best and love. So they're like night and day as far as who you could be using those for.
Thank you, Brandy. Next question is from Mario. How to improve working with diagrams? Do we need vocabulary practice?
Yeah, well, vocabulary practice is helpful for just about anything you do for sure. I think when you're working with the diagrams, the vocab is probably not as challenging because there's less written information. You'll notice in the diagram we looked at today, you're getting a lot of information. First with the picture, there will be images throughout, but the details that are listed in words are oftentimes bulleted points or very short sentences because we can't fit a lot into the limited space. So your vocabulary certainly will help you, but I think working with diagrams specifically, it's more about recognizing patterns of organization. So again, that's why we start with, what am I looking at? Oh, it's a travel brochure. Right away, that helps me understand what I'm doing. I noticed the dates, the prices, the stars. And then when we looked at those little tiny sentences, I think there were maybe 3 sentences per part. We're just pulling out the simple facts. It tells me about food, tells me about accommodation, tells me about airfare. So those words on their own are not incredibly complex to understand. You just have to know where to look. So I think working with these diagrams, as I say, it's more about understanding the patterns and how it's structured and put together. That's going to help you the most. And of course, understanding the words in the questions and answers too. Reading part 2, because it comes second in your reading test of the 4 parts, reading part 2 is still going to be quite a bit easier than what you'll expect when you get to the end. So again, with your vocab, hopefully it's a nice middle ground and you won't be stumped with any words that you've never seen. That's the good news anyway for this question.
Okay, thank you for that. Hang on. So this is a question about how much practice somebody needs. If I practice 25 to 30 sample papers, will I get CLP score 10 to 12? Sorry about the noise.
That's okay. I mean, practicing is very subjective. So the amount of practice any one person needs depends a lot, first of all, on what your current skill set is at. So what level are you already at when you start your practicing? If you're already at a fairly intermediate advanced level, you'll need a lot less practice, of course, than if you're coming in at, say, a beginner or a lower intermediate level. So again, determine your own skill set. You'll know, even if you've not taken a class, even if you've not had a teacher tell you what level or what level you're at, you should have a pretty realistic understanding if you can understand the words that you're reading. So looking at the diagram that we did today, if a lot of these words were very difficult for you to understand, that would indicate then you need to do a lot more work on the vocabulary first before you even get into practicing the actual question, right? So there's quite a bit of self-assessment that goes along with this. Figure out where you're starting. You'll know, I guess, how much more work you have to do. That's step 1. The second thing I'll address is I'm not sure doing practice questions. It's a good way to practice. We just did a practice question together, of course, so you can see how the test is set up and you start to unlock these strategies and clues as to how to go back and forth between questions and answers. But I think as we're studying, we don't want to just get into that habit of only doing these practice questions. Remember, there are so many other skills that we could be working at as well. So for this diagram one, it's self-explanatory with the vocab. As you get into other parts of this test, like part 3 and 4, you're going to want to work also on your sentence structure and your complex grammar, because you need to understand what you're reading in those questions, right? In order to choose the best item from the list. So yes, do your practice questions, but do other skill set developments to make yourself a very well-rounded reader. It's not just about vocab. It's not just about practice tests either. Now, again, I can't honestly say realistically if doing 30 practice questions will guarantee a level 10. Again, that really depends on your current level of ability, I guess, and how quickly you're picking up the skills as you develop. But the more practice you do, arguably, the better you will get. So hopefully you'll continue to climb up in your level of ability to achieve the score that you're looking for in the end.
Okay, here's the next one. I could be wrong, but from previous lives, Brandy mentioned about tasks may repeat. We have to answer all questions, and we won't know if a certain task is being marked.
Yeah, so Neelash is asking a good question. It has to do with an unscored part on the test. And yes, you're right. We have talked about this in other CELPIP Live episodes, so it's good to review it now too. So when you do your CELPIP reading test, you will have those 4 parts that we looked at in the chart. You're being scored on those 4 parts, and that's where your level comes from, being marked out of 38 possible answers. On some CELPIP tests that you'll sit down to write, there might be an additional part. So for example, we just did reading part 2 today with this travel brochure. If this was the real test, normally you go right on to part 3 after you're finished the diagram. But if on your test, all of a sudden, you go on to another diagram question, what that tells you is that of those 2 diagram questions, so of the 2 reading part 2s on the test, only one of them is being scored by the computer to count towards your CELPIP score. The other one is unscored. All language proficiency tests have unscored content when that particular question is being piloted. So it just means it's a newer question. We need to absolutely verify and confirm that the question is performing up to the very high standard set, the performance standard, so that it's fair. so that everybody can answer the questions and be scored fairly on that. So you do have to complete both of those parts, but you yourself as the test taker are not going to know which of those parts is the one that counts for the score and which one is the unscored section. So in other words, you're going to have to do your best at every single question that you're given on the test to make sure that you are indeed being successful on the part that counts. All right. Now I know understandably, a lot of our test takers say, oh, it's a 3-hour test and now I have a whole other part to do. And I understand that, I do. I can reassure you that the entire time it takes to write CELPIP, you have a maximum of 3.5 hours, and the extra part is factored into that. So the average person takes about 3 hours to finish CELPIP. If you do have an extra part, it's an additional 9 to 12 minutes, I guess, extra on top of that. So you'll still finish well within the maximum time limit. Yeah, but it does take a bit more energy, I understand. And I think that's partly why Nilesh is asking. It's kind of just the way it goes, you know. But we do have to pilot the new content to make sure it's performing, and that's why it's there. So thank you for asking that. I hope I've explained it clearly enough.
We have another question about scoring, and I'm just going to share it here before I share the other ones because it's related. I'm a bit confused about the score. At the time of practicing, I'm getting 28. So what score do I need to consider a 7 or an 8?
Yep, so we talked about that during at the beginning of today's episode. It's called score equating. So later on, you can go back and review that part of the episode. I'll just say again, it has to do with the complexity of the question. So now I don't have the score in front of me, but I'm assuming because you're asking, 28 is showing up in both levels 7 and 8. So if your particular test question, if you had 1 or 2 questions that were just a little bit more challenging than somebody else's test, then you would be scoring a level 8 with that, I guess. If somebody had a question or 2 that was just a slight bit more or less complex, then their same score of 28 would earn them that level 7. So it has to do with the level of complexity of the individual questions on the test. And that's what determines which of the scores you're getting when there's an overlap. I hope that helps. I know it is a very complex process, so it's good to ask these things.
Thank you, Tara. More than a couple of people have their test this weekend, and they want to know if you have any last-minute important tips for them.
Okay, so today is Tuesday, so we've got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you probably have about 4 days left to go. This is going to sound corny, the best thing you can do is make sure you're taking care of yourself leading up to the test. That means you're eating properly and you're sleeping well. If you're not focused, if you're hungry, if you're tired, you're not going to perform as well as you might have. So that's step number 1 is self-care. Forget about the language for a moment and just make sure you're in a very calm, clear, focused mental state before you take this test, because it's an important test. So you want to be making sure you're feeling ready and confident. So that's step 1. The second thing I would do, you've got 4 days left. So this would be your opportunity to determine for yourself what is the weakest part of your skill set. So you know you're going to be tested on reading, writing, speaking, and listening. In 4 days, you're not going to have time to cram in all these lessons to do all 4 of those content areas. So I think at this point of time, I would determine maybe 1 or 2 particular skills that you feel for yourself are the weakest. And that's where you're going to put your extra little bit of study time towards this week as you're moving into the test. So again, if you're having a hard time writing an email or writing a paragraph in a short amount of time, you're going to set a timer at home. You know you have 27 minutes, right, for that email question. Set yourself a timer at home. Write out an email from start to finish. If you can't get it done in 27 minutes, put it aside, take a break, come back at it and do it again. So do it until you've mastered that skill. In 4 days, you should be able to show some improvement there. But one of the best tips I can give is please don't cram it all in. Now is not the time to overwhelm your brain. You can only hold so much information. And you don't want to exhaust yourself either before you get into this test. So hopefully you knew that your test was coming this weekend. So I'm assuming that you've put a lot of study time towards the test over the last several weeks and months. So, trust in that. Trust that you've done the work. And again, use these remaining few days to fine tune it and just focus on the skills that you want to elevate and go into the test knowing that you're going to ace it, right? Confidence says a lot. When you tell yourself you've got this, oftentimes you do. So good luck on your test. Yeah, for those of you writing too, by the way, I hope it goes well.
Thank you. Also, just a general reminder, do not copy paste and spam the messaging, the chat with questions, I will put you in timeout. So here's another question that we have. Are these questions in sequence?
Sorry, you said, are they test questions in sequence, you said? Yes, so you start with part 1 and you go up to part 4. So the 4 parts of the test are in that exact order, and you can't skip around. You have to do those exactly as they're presented. Somebody asked earlier, I saw, when your time is up, I forget who now, doesn't matter. Anyway, when your time is up, so in part 2, you've got, what did you say, 9 minutes. When that time clock reaches 0, the test will automatically move you to part 3. So you're going to just keep moving right along, right? So it goes in that order. Now, in each part you do, so we did part 2 today. Remember, you had that email up top and then those 3 questions at the bottom. If you come to one of those questions and you're not sure the answer, you're very welcome yourself to leave that blank for now and then move forward to finish the rest of that part. I think that's a good strategy. If you've only got those 9 minutes, you don't want to be spending 5 minutes on one question if you're stuck. So that's what I do on tests that I've written in the past. If there's one that stumps me, I'll leave it blank. I'll also write a note. You're given paper and pen in the test. I will write down the number of the question that I skipped, because that will remind me when I'm done to go back and complete it. Because sometimes you forget when you get to the end, right? So skip it over, finish the rest of them. Hopefully you still have 30 seconds left on your clock or whatever. That's when you go back and you really focus in on that tough question that you skipped over. And again, if you still don't know, guess. Please put something in the blank. So yeah, hopefully that answered.
Coming back to the question about the sequence, I think they mean by sequence of story. So like if you're doing a reading section or if you're doing a listening section, are the questions going to come in order of events?
Oh, I see. Okay, so for today's practice, it doesn't really apply. Think about reading. Yeah, in other parts, actually, I shouldn't say it doesn't apply. Generally speaking, yes. When you're reading through any type of a text, like today we did look at that email, right, on the top part of the test. So yes, normally speaking, you're going to go through the questions and answers will be located in more or less the same order as the original source gives you that information. Yeah, again, sorry, part 2, it doesn't really work that way because you're just looking back to the diagram and those details are bulleted, right? So more about like other parts of reading, part 1, part 3, where you're reading an actual text and listening as well. When you're listening to the passage, the questions on the test usually follow the same order that the source material is giving it to you. I say usually because if you have, say, an inference question or a general meaning question, sometimes you can't put that in an order. So if I ask you, what's the main topic of this whole passage? You know, that I could ask you that question at the beginning of the test or at the end, and it doesn't matter. You still have to look at the whole text to come up with that. But those specific detailed questions and other parts, yeah, they tend to follow the same order as the source. So there, I hope that answers. Now we've covered all bases with the order questions.
Okay. Somebody asked a question which was already answered by one of our viewers, but I'm still going to share it here just so that they also hear from you. Will there be 2 answers for one question?
2 answers for one question. I'm not sure if we're talking about like an unscored part, or I think he's talking about actual, like when you've got the 4 answer choices in CELPIP, only one of them is correct, period. Yeah. In other tests, I know sometimes they ask you to choose more than one answer. Not for the CELPIP reading here, no. So when you use those drop-down arrow boxes and it pops open those 4 answer choices, you are choosing one answer only. There's only one correct answer, yeah. And that's a really good thing to know. I'm glad Jen has asked that, actually. It's going to help the rest of us make sure we have one answer and one answer only.
Okay. I don't know exactly what this question means, but maybe you will understand. Any last minute advice for part 2 as I make mistakes to understand the words in a quicker way?
Yeah, so it sounds like AJ's struggling a little bit with some of the vocabulary that you might encounter in that diagram or in the email as well. So again, if you come across a word at any point, not just in part 2, if you come across a word or phrase that you don't understand, an efficient reader, I guess, is going to then read the entire sentence where that new word appears. And there should be enough familiar language throughout that sentence or in that part of the test that you do understand, and you can use your knowledge to guess the meaning of that new word. All right, we do that all the time when we're reading. If you read for leisure, I like to read a lot of novels in my spare time. I come across words all the time I've never seen before. That's how we develop our vocabulary. So we look back to the words that came before. We know what those words mean. So then we can take a very logical guess as to the meaning of that new word. So that's a good way to sometimes determine meaning of these new words. If you still can't do that, maybe there's just too many new words that you're not familiar with, at that point in time, you're going to have to just, on a test situation when you don't have a dictionary, you're simply just going to have to do the best with what you have. In that case, you might honestly need to guess an answer if there's just no way of determining what those new words mean, on the test itself. So you can see how vocabulary development's key, right, for just about everything you do in reading and writing and speaking and listening to.
So we have a couple questions about speaking. So there is one. First one is from Kruti, and she's asking, what can we do if we stop speaking abruptly in the middle of a speaking task?
Okay, so people who stop speaking suddenly, it's usually for one of two reasons. It's either you don't have enough vocabulary, so you don't know what you're going to say next. You're having a hard time phrasing those ideas and coming up with them, or you don't have enough ideas to fill the time. So on your CELPIP speaking test, you're speaking for 60 seconds or 90 seconds. So if it's a vocabulary issue, again, that's where it takes time on your end to practice and develop your vocab. And that's an ongoing process that can take months and even years, right, to elevate the vocab depending. As far as the ideas go, and this is a better tip for your test itself, you are given a short amount of time to prepare. You get either 30 seconds or 60 seconds to think of your ideas before you start speaking. So again, at home, what you're going to want to do is practice generating enough ideas first to fill a minute of talk time. Once you've got your ideas down, you're going to then set a timer so that you can actually think of those ideas more quickly. Okay, so it's a real skill, it takes practice, to write down a couple of keywords on a page. And while you're speaking into your microphone on the test, you're looking at your notes, but you're taking those words, you're extending them into full sentences, sometimes 2 or 3 sentences to fully explain it. If you stop suddenly, what I'd like you to do is, we're not supposed to stop, we know this, pausing is a negative thing. But if you panic, you lose your train of thought, you don't know what to say, the best thing you can do in the moment is just pause, take those extra 2 or 3 seconds, honestly take a deep breath. That's going to reset a little bit. You're going to look at the notes that I hope you've made, and you're going to pick a point that you're comfortable speaking about, and you're just going to move forward as best you can, even if it doesn't completely continue where you left off. So talking about something that's relevant to your question is better than just stopping short and not saying anything at all, right? So there's a lot going on there. A lot comes with the practice at home, but then also troubleshooting on the test. If you do have a moment where some of us freeze, speaking's not an easy task to do, especially if you're speaking in a different language than your own and you're nervous on a test. So yes, sometimes we get nervous and we freeze, but we have to find a way to keep moving forward, all right? Even if it's a matter of stopping and restarting in a whole new direction. Hope that helps. I hear you, Kruti, it's hard.
Amy's is the same question, but it's more about what is the right thing to do if we suddenly run out of vocabulary while we're talking or while we're taking your speaking test. As a test taker myself, English is my second language, and I find it difficult sometimes.
Yeah. So the same study strategies that I've just explained there apply. But in this case, I think maybe a reassuring point that I can raise right now is that when you're being scored for your speaking, remember the raters are looking at about 4 different categories or skill sets. Vocabulary is just one part of it. So even if you don't have a strong or a widely developed vocabulary, if you've got enough base words there that make sense to answer the question, right? You're actually answering the question. Even if you're repeating the same words and phrases throughout, provided you've still got enough content details there that actually answer the question, and provided you can fill the talk time and you've followed all parts of the question. Part 1 in speaking asks you to give advice, for example. So if you can come up with 2 or 3 pieces of advice and talk to the friend that the instructions on the test tell you, that's going to contribute towards your score as well. So you might not have a strong vocab. You might be using simple words, or you might be repeating some of those same words over and over. but you might also have some really good content details, and that will actually help to balance out your score. So you might be weaker in vocab, but if the other skills and your speaking part is okay, you keep the speech moving, you're not interjecting too much, your intonation's normal, those are going to work in your favor, and they might actually help to, as I say, balance the lower vocabulary skills. So this is not an all or nothing type situation on your test, right? Raters are not looking for perfection, and you might see sometimes a test taker who's actually achieved a level 8 or 9, which are really good scores for anybody to achieve. And sometimes you yourself might say, their vocab looks a little simple to me. And if that's the case and they're still achieving that level 8 or 9, it's because they've demonstrated strong skills elsewhere. So keep that in mind too when you're studying. Don't stress just about the vocab. Focus on the other things that you know how to do well too.
Good tip. I actually learned a lot from that answer. So we have 2 more questions for you, Brandy. This is one. Can we collect vocabulary in reading and drop them in our writing? Is the meaning more relevant to the topic we got?
Absolutely, yeah. So now remember, the computer is scoring the reading and the listening sections, right? Right, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so if you're reading through a passage on the reading test and you come across a word there that is of note and interest to you, by all means, write it down on your notepad, on your note paper during the test. You'll be doing the writing section third in the CELPIP test, right? Yeah, because the writing comes after the reading. So smart, Hannah. I like this idea. I never thought of doing this. I see why you're asking, because you're doing the writing part next anyway. So why not look at use some of these words in your writing, as long as you're doing it appropriately in the context of the question, right? The worst thing we can do is pick really big, long, complicated words and plunk them into our own writing. Sometimes we think we're impressing the raters with their vocab, but if the word doesn't make sense in the sentence, it's not helpful. But yeah, if you're seeing words in the reading that you find useful, write them down. And if you can find a way to actually apply them to the email or the survey type question, and it makes sense to do so, that's fine. The raters who are marking the writing have nothing to do with the scoring in the reading. The computer scores your test anyway. So yeah, now that being said, I will say at no time is it acceptable to plagiarize or copy. You're not clearly going to write down full sentences from a reading text and try to pass those off in the writing. The raters will know something's up. But if you've got the odd word here and there that you think is relevant, I think that would be a fine strategy for sure.
Thank you, Brandy. Actually, a good example of this is if people who are watching, if you guys watch Friends, there's an episode where Joey is writing a letter to an adoption agency to convince them that Monica and Chandler should have a kid. Please read the letter he writes. Please watch that episode if you haven't already. And that is a good example of what not to do, just so that you can use big words. That's the first thing that popped up into my head.
Yeah, I've seen that episode and I know what you mean. It's hilarious. So yeah, that's a good one for the viewers to watch.
Okay, so last question here is from Tarang. If we finish before time, can we manually go to the next task?
Yeah, you absolutely can. Trying to think. So again, the reading part 2 we looked at today on the top of the screen. So I'm trying to visualize. So you've got your diagram on the left, the questions are on the right, and right in that top right corner, there's always going to be the timer clock. Right beside the timer clock that's counting down, there's a next button. It's a rectangular blue button. It has the word next right on it. So if you have finished answering all your questions and you're happy with the answers, you've double checked them, you don't want to make any changes, you might have, say, 30 or 40 seconds left on the clock. If you don't want to just sit and wait, you can click next and you'll move right on to the next part of the test. So in today's episode, we did part 2. So you would move on to reading part 3. You cannot take any extra time with you though. So I will advise you on that. So if you click next with 30 seconds left, it doesn't mean you get an extra 30 seconds in the next part. You just get to move on in the test more quickly. And I guess I should mention there's no back button either. So once you move forward, if that's what you choose to do, and you realize, oh, shoot, I wanted to go back, and it's too late. So click next with confidence, knowing you're moving on. There's no way back after that time.
Okay, thank you, Brandy. The questions for you are done. I think we've got all the questions at the moment. But thank you so much for joining us, Brandy. I appreciate I appreciate you being here and answering all of viewers' questions.
My pleasure. And again, a very special good luck to those of you writing your test this weekend. I hope it goes well. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that was Brandy with a reading. Priya, I see your question here and I will answer that for you. Today is actually our last episode for this season. We will be coming back later with more, but we will be taking a break and we'll be coming back for season 3. If you have any questions or if you have any doubts about a particular topic, please check our previous videos. We have season 1 and season 2 of CELPIP Live. Chances are your questions are already answered. But just wanted to let you know that, yes, today is our last episode for season 2. And that was our episode. I haven't forgotten our trivia question. Which Canadian city hosted the 2010 Winter Olympic Games? And the answer is Vancouver. Not a lot of you got it in the beginning. I know one or two of you did. Let me see if I can share that quickly without wasting time. Where are you, Andre? No. There you are. Thank you for getting the answer right. Somebody else also said Vancouver, so both of you are right. Thank you for joining us and subscribing to our channel. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with anybody else that you think might find it useful. I know that a lot of you are giving your tests now, so if you have a friend or family who's preparing, please share this video with them as well. If you have been following our episodes, like I mentioned earlier, this is our last episode. But we will be working on more. We will be working on future episodes. So please drop your suggestions in the comments. A lot of the episodes we have here actually were from suggestions that you made. So please do continue to drop your suggestions in the comments below. Also feel free to ask any doubts in the comments. Even if we're not doing the lives, we can probably answer these questions for you. You can also send your suggestions and your questions to communications@paragontesting.ca. But until next time, please stay safe and good luck with your test. Bye.